Good morning, and welcome to Issues That Matter. And once again, I'm very pleased to be here. And before I do anything else, I want to take the time to thank the people in the control room that make this magic happen, and for supporting the efforts, my efforts, as well as the efforts of all the other producers and hosts of here on Biddeford Public Access. They do a fabulous job, and it's not easy. So, gentlemen and ladies, thank you. And now to the show. We have a very interesting guest today, and he's going through some very interesting times. We have Marty Groman, who he told me he'd rather be called Marty, so I'll call him Marty now.
Either way,
Marty
fine.
Groman, who has been a state rep now for 2 years, and now he's running for Congress at the national level. And we're going to talk about that. So, Martin, thank you.
Thanks,
welcome.
Bob. Thanks for having me on.
Interesting times.
Yeah, it is. So yeah, I've been a state rep. Had the honor of representing part of Biddeford for 4 years now. Greatest honor of my life, and I've been here in Biddeford since 2000. I moved here to start a business, and never left. Just had a really good experience here. My kids are in the schools here. My wife works at the school department, and it's just a great community, and it's been wonderful to raise a family here and have the chance to represent Biddeford in the legislature. And now I'm looking to grow that role and responsibility based on what I think I bring. And so yeah, it's an exciting time. You're right.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm sure it feeds the excitement is that when you were a state rep, you were a member of the Democratic Party. You represented yourself as a Democrat. Now you're an independent.
Correct. Yeah.
What caused you to make that transformation?
Well, I'm an entrepreneur. I think the independent was a good fit for me there, and just the opportunity to represent everybody. I joke I don't have a problem with either party. I think they're both great. It's the two of them together that's the problem. So, I think that we've gotten to a place in this world where the party structure is great. It's wonderful, but are we spending too much time thinking about what's great for the party and not what's great for the country? And I think a lot of people feel that way, and I've certainly begun to feel that way. So there's an opportunity as an independent to just work on things issue by issue, whether or not they're part of a particular party platform.
I would say you might want to give that a second thought, because you're agreeing with me. You're absolutely right. We need not only on the part of our politicians that are representing us in Washington or in Augusta, but on the part of every individual. We've got to be able to work together and find and have calm discussion and find commonalities that you can work, that you can push, and at the expense of those differences, if you will.
Yeah.
You got to put the commonalities in as a priority above the disagreements.
I think that's right, Bob. I mean, that's my tagline for my campaign is fix, not fight. And what I mean by that is, let's look for those issues where we can, improve health care, or work on opioid recovery, or improve the business climate, and focus on those areas where we can actually get good, sensible policy advance that we all agree on, and move those things along. And sure, there are going to be areas of disagreement, but let's not spend all our time battling over those. Instead, let's pick a few key issues and move on them. And that's what I've been about. The whole kind of fix, not fight movement is about. And I think people really relate to that. They respond to that. I think, if our jobs every day, if all we did was argue every day and never got anything done, we'd probably get fired, So that I think there's a level of frustration out there that I've been hearing, and that's part of the reason that I'm running the way I am.
As an insight, for my benefit, and hopefully for the benefit of others as well, Where do you think the disagreement comes from? Do you see it coming from your fellow representatives and fellow state senators, or do you see it coming from the leadership?
I think there are, between the parties, no, wonderful people on both sides of every issue, and I know that you hear that a lot. So you think, why can't you all just get along? No, I think there's frankly there's a lot of dollars behind taking a particular policy position a lot of times, and that's sort of where the business of running a party comes in, and that structure where a party kind of builds up a particular policy position. Sometimes you wonder, is there a heartfelt position here, or is there just some dollars behind it? So I think that does drive a lot of what goes on, and I think sometimes the sad truth is that delaying things is a good way to hold an issue open, not resolve it, and maybe raise more money around it. So I don't think any of us would do that in our day-to-day life. If we had the opportunity to just figure an issue out and fix a leaky faucet or something, we'd do it. But politics doesn't ever always work that way, and that's what I'm really trying to change, and I know that I can't change it all by myself, but I think if we keep sending people down there to Washington who are centrists, who are focused on just doing the job and getting results, we can change the way Washington works.
Now, I may well be mistaken here, because I make mistakes often.
You and me both.
It's a pleasure of being on the show.
Yeah.
I don't know. In any event, you're running for House of Representatives, and you will be supplanting Shelley Pingree?
I'm running against Congresswoman Pingree. That's correct. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. And
Big jump.
It is a very big jump, and I have immense respect for Congresswoman Pingree. She's been there for 10 years, but I just looked at the situation and said, I think it's time for a change, and people are interested in a different voice down there in D.C. And I'm getting a lot of support. The campaign is going really well, and we'll see in November whether I'm correct about that, but definitely I'm running a strong campaign. I've got a great team, and I'm getting a really good response.
Great. Now, I heard you speak when you had your kickoff meeting, or kickoff event.
Yep.
And you said something about impossibilities or things that never...
Yeah,
Run that by me again.
I told a story about starting the decking plant. It's used to be Correct Deck, now it's Duralife Decking over in the Biddeford Industrial Park. And we had this situation where we needed to, I was literally shoveling sawdust by hand in order to feed the machines. Everybody who worked there was doing it, and it was getting really, the business was a big success, but truckloads of sawdust shoveling was getting out of hand, and I was starting to get tennis elbow, and we knew we had to put in a silo to hold all this material, and so we brought in the engineers, and they said, "Look, Marty, we've looked at the ground here, we've looked at the space that you have, we've looked at the equipment that's available, and I'm afraid this is impossible." And I was just frustrated in that moment. I was really determined, and I said, "You know what? I already know it's impossible. Just tell me what the first step is." And they said, "Well, the first step is you'd have to pour a cement pad." And I said, "Well, let's pour a cement pad. Let's do it." So, yeah, it's like this campaign. People say, "Well, you're making a big jump," and they're right. I've been in Augusta for 4 years, but I think people are ready for that change, and so I'm taking the steps. The first step was to collect the signatures and get on the ballot. You have to, as an independent, collect twice as many signatures as you do for a party. That's something that. Yeah, it's harder at every step for an independent to get on the ballot, to win. All of it is harder because of the way the sort of legacy of the parties, but I'm committed to doing it, and we did that. We collected those signatures, and I looked at that. How are you going to collect thousands of signatures, but it was a blast. I mean, just going around meeting people all over from Waterville to Parsons Field and Kittery and everywhere in between. A lot of Little League games.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, and I don't think I'm mistaken because we've already discussed it a little bit, that Governor LePage, evidently you have a endorsement from the governor, which, from my perspective, is pretty unusual for an independent candidate to get a governor's endorsement when his own party has a candidate. How did that come about?
Just to kind of lay the situation out. I mean, the governor, I think I could say, is a friend or somebody that we've worked together on a variety of issues, and we see eye to eye on a bunch of issues. He didn't issue an official endorsement. Instead, he made some positive remarks about me at a public appearance that he had at the Portland Regional Chamber, and I appreciated that. I mean, it was kind of him to say. Certainly, he's been very successful in his political career and has a particular approach that has worked for him. Like I said, I have a lot of respect for Governor LePage, and we do see eye to eye on some issues, and and not on others, to be blunt. But what I think he's done well, and people do value this in politicians, is that, and hopefully I can do this, is if you and I agree on something, great, we work together. We have this other area that we don't agree on. For me, it's Medicaid expansion with Governor LePage. I think that's a good idea. He doesn't. But he doesn't let that sort of get in the middle of things we can work together on, right? And I think that's what people want in politicians. So Governor LePage has, I'll just mention two good ideas that he's working on right now, and one of them is very timely, really. So student loan refinancing is just a huge issue. Governor LePage sees that. Is that an opportunity for us to bring more young people, more career people in technical careers in the trades into Maine? Yeah, we see that. So we work together on a bill around that this session, and then sort of top of mind right now as the legislative session is continuing is keeping seniors in their homes is a real priority for him. And so look, we see eye to eye on that. He's got what I think is an innovative piece of legislation that I'd like to see moved along. And so even though we disagree about Medicaid expansion, we work together on this thing. And why not? Why not? Why put up a wall just because we don't agree on everything? I think that's the way he and I both look at things.
And I suspect strongly that's a pretty good way to do it.
Thank you. Yeah, I think so.
Good way to do it. I think we need to see more of that at both the state as well as the federal level.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think people feel that way and not focus on where the areas of difference are. And
as a state rep, in our discussion earlier before the show, we talked briefly about opiate addiction.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that?
So I started out my career as a legislator on the Energy Committee, which gets into solar and things like that, and we spend, that's very interesting and very meaningful, and clean energy policy is important. But I had an opportunity to go, frankly, outside of my kind of career knowledge and maybe even a little bit my kind of knowledge area and comfort zone, and spend a term on the Criminal Justice Committee. And criminal justice and public safety, we do it all over there, and we do a lot of drug policy, and it's been a real eye-opener for me, and I've been so interested as people have come in and presented bills, very compassionate, heartfelt testimony. You leave that committee room crying some days to hear about the things that have happened to people, and I've really developed, I feel strongly, we need resources for law enforcement, everything that we can do to stop the flow of these horrible, poisonous, addictive drugs into our country and into the state of Maine. But at the same time, we have to be compassionate and work with the people who are struggling with substance use disorder. We can't forget them. So I think the two things really need to go together. We need the law enforcement support and the strength there, but we also have got to work with people in recovery
Now
to
back-
get them to recovery.
Back, I think it's just about a year now, I had a couple of guests on the show, Sergeant for the Biddeford PD,
Yes.
as well as their resource analyst or resource.
Yes. Steve Gordon, Sergeant Gordon, and Megan Lambert Irish.
Right,
Correct.
right.
Yep. Wonderful. We're so fortunate to have them in this innovative program in Biddeford. Yeah, the SACO Biddeford Opioid Outreach Initiative.
One of the pieces of information that I picked up then was that, and I just read a study at the national level, federal level, that said that over 50% of the people that are addicted on opiates are Medicaid or Medicare. So it essentially, not in any purposeful way, but simply by circumstance, we end up funding the opiate addiction. It's a very difficult challenge. I mean, I don't know that there's a solution to it.
I mean, I think that's really interesting. I've spent a lot of time looking into this, and it's a powerful, powerful story of the way medicine worked 15 or 20 years ago that kicked off. I think there's agreement, or certainly you can make a strong argument that over-prescribing of opioids, and particularly OxyContin, really just opened Pandora's box of the issue that we face today. And the way that we got into it, I mean, is essentially oxycodone is an opiate, the active ingredient in OxyContin, right? So you know this, but OxyContin means continuous. So the idea was that this is one pill you could take if you just had a wisdom tooth pulled, or you had arthroscopic surgery on your knee or something like that. And there was a hypothesis in medicine that look, these opioids are addictive, but if the person is dealing with chronic pain, then that addiction risk goes away. And that was the thinking back then. So pharmaceutical companies pushed this idea, and medical professionals certainly wanted to help people in chronic pain, understandably. And I hope we can get into that more later in the show, because I have an interesting take on the chronic pain side of things too. But so we got to a place where, there were cases where somebody could get 480 pills for a month, for a particular surgery or something like that. I think now we look back on that and go, well, that's a bit much. You didn't need, and I think it arguably was, but it kind of kicked off this situation, where I think there was a time where you could be prescribed way, way more than you need. Now, in the state of Maine, we have dramatically tightened up those prescription limits, and we've also really, I think, practically eliminated the concept of doctor shopping, that you could get a prescription one day and the next day get the same prescription because of just the software involved. So, and even tying software packages together to prevent that kind of thing. So, but it's a dramatic issue, and a difficult one, no question about it.
Medicaid expansion, that seems to be an issue just about every year around this time of year. And what about, I don't know, I forget what year it was, but at one time they expanded Medicaid, and it ended up being a horror show. It built a big deficit, and we ended up having the hospitals not being paid. What is it that would make it more amenable today, as opposed to what it was back then, when it was an absolute bust?
Yeah, I think when you look at this issue, and those in opposition are coming from a legitimate place of saying we need to protect the fiscal health of the state. So there was an innovative program called the Dirigo Health
Yep.
Program, I believe it was called, in the early 2000s, and it did. It's my understanding, get us out over our skis a little bit financially as the state. So kind of looking for areas of commonality, we need to find a way to cover people. I strongly believe that. Think of it this way: if we left, the Dunkin' Donuts and we walked out and we saw somebody, unfortunately, had been hit in the road, we wouldn't run out there and check for their insurance card before we arranged to help them.
Right, I agree.
Right.
I totally agree with that.
We would get that person help as quick as we can, no matter what, and that kind of consideration would never enter our mind, right? So that's where our nonprofit hospitals are. They take by law everybody, all comers, and they help them if there's somebody who's overdosed, or if there's somebody with a heart condition, or so many people have co-occurring disorders now, they say, type thing. The hospitals take them and they help them.
But what is in the bill now, the bill that they're trying to get through, that might tell a person it's not going to happen again? We're not going to build up that big deficit.
Well, the direct answer is that federal reimbursement rates are different now than they were then. So and this is why I think so strongly think it's a good idea, is that, and two reasons. The first goes back to the opioid crisis. So if somebody is getting on that path to recovery, having good health care coverage so that they can get referred to doctors, to professionals for health screenings and everything that they need to stay on that path to recovery and become a tax-paying member of society again, get back on their feet, helping their kids get to school and so on. They need health coverage. And the federal reimbursement rate is 90% plus to help with that kind of work. And this is a federal problem, this opioid crisis.
Yeah.
It is a nationwide problem. These drugs are not coming from Maine. They aren't. They're coming into Maine, and we need federal help for what is a federal problem. And that's really issue one for me on getting this Medicaid expansion done. And that's really the big difference from back when.
Where do you see the hole, you might say, in the federal handling of opiate addiction? What needs to change at the federal level, if there is something that can change at the federal level, to try and stem the tide of opiate addiction?
That's a great question. I mean, I think a lot of it comes back to resources for people in recovery. When you, if you think about that person who, I just toured on 3 days ago the Nassau Community Health Center in Springvale. I met with a medical professional over there who told the story of someone who they had been able to help, and that person had a positive interaction with law enforcement, and that changed their life. So being able to have an officer who was trained, had the resources, and had the ability to make a quick referral to grab that person who was close to using again and get that person into a drug court. And I think this is the federal thing right here, where we need to finance more of these drug courts. If you're dealing with someone who's a significant heroin dealer, a kingpin, we need to get that person, cut off the head of the snake and lock them up. for as long as is justifiable. But if we're dealing with somebody who's been who's had a brush with the law, is a low-level user, and we judge, the professionals involved judge, is a good candidate for treatment, we got to grab that moment right then. And if it's a Thursday afternoon, not wait until Monday morning to get that person referred to the right kinds of treatment and get them back on their feet. This whole thing it's remarkable how it's catching up a generation of people, a lot of young people. And my wife works in the school system, and the number of young children being raised by their grandparents is really stark. And it's we're seeing it in the workforce and everything. There's only about 30 babies born in Maine every day. Actually, it's not very many, and 3 of them on average are drug dependent. So it's capturing a whole generation. So if we can grab people at that vulnerable moment in a positive interaction with law enforcement, by positive I mean not just by assessing their individual situation, determining if they're a candidate for treatment, that really can change that cycle. And I argue it's ultimately a good financial outcome too, because locking somebody up is, $50,000 a year plus. I mean, how many kids could you put through school for that? Let's get people back on their feet and being tax-paying, contributing members of society. I'm just so passionate about that, you can tell.
Well, yes, and it's something good to be passionate about. Mm-hmm. The trick is, how do you do it successfully? That's the tough part.
Yeah,
it's a wonderful thing to think about. It's a wonderful thing to try, but you always have to be mindful about how do we do it.
Yeah,
how can it be done?
Well, there are models.
That's why we have people running for Senate and representing the House of Representatives. That's where the people look to get those ideas.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. I mean, I the number one thing I want to say is recovery is possible, right? But what I mean by that is if you're struggling with the disease of substance use disorder right now, watching this show, you can do it. You can get out of it. Recovery is possible. It is not a death sentence, and we don't need to give up on you. It can be done.
Yeah, there's another issue. Not, I would venture to say, nowhere near as large as the drug issue, but gender conversion. And we recently, I think we had a bill that went through the House. And I don't know whether it made it to the Senate.
Yeah.
What's your position on that? I know I had a show that had a person who had a gender conversion, and frankly, I enjoyed the person. She was a good guest. But I can't wrap my arms around it. I think we have to accept it, which is the point that I made on the show. Whether you agree with it or not is a different issue. It's a factor. It's out there, and we have to be able to come to terms with it, and not have it further tear our society apart, because our society is being torn apart in so many other areas. How do we accomplish that?
Yeah, I think that's insightful, Bob, and I think that you are hitting on something. I'm a relentlessly pro-business person, right? I have this quote on my wall. It's actually from Paul Tsongas, and it's a strong economy is the engine that drives all social progress, right? So to me, that means when we can invest in jobs in the economy, that is a rising tide that raises all boats, and it makes social programs, which are so needed, possible. You got to have that money in the bank to make the rest of the thing run. And I try to focus on issues like that and make life better for Mainers every day, for Americans every day, all the time. I kind of view my job as almost like the front door of government. So I'm working with a guy right now who is struggling with a medical billing situation that's got, he's being unfairly billed medically and for an out-of-network procedure, right? And so I've done a lot of work on that issue called surprise medical billing, and I've been able to get after that and fix that problem for him. That's the kind of thing that I try to work on, you know, and that's what I think people are really looking for, is for all of us in politics to just focus on those mainstream issues that make life better for Mainers and Americans every day. And that's a big part of what I try to do.
Good. Excellent. Very good response.
Yeah. People value that, and you know, you get back into the you know, another area where I think people are looking for progress is in the technical careers. Work with a young gentleman here in Biddeford who has an advanced welding certificate and couldn't work in that trade because of an odd and arcane federal rule. And what a thing to understand how that worked. I mean, you've got a kid who can, a young man who could weld with the best of them, and we could have gotten him 10 jobs, but you know, there was an odd and I think unfortunate workplace rule related to the fact that he hadn't graduated high school yet, even though he had these advanced certifications and all of the safety certifications. And that's the kind of thing that I just want to break. If we're trying to take on the skills gap and get students transitioning into these technical trades, why would there be this barrier?
I just read a piece, I think yesterday, that talked about in the state of Maine. They're talking about changing the licensing, where a person could be licensed in another state, be very, very well established in another state.
Yeah.
They want to move to Maine because we have a beautiful state.
Yep. And we need you. We need people here.
And they might be very successful. They might be very knowledgeable and have all the credentials, but because they're missing one little piece, which is in essence meaningless to what they do, they can't get the license.
Yeah.
Or the license takes forever and with a lot of legwork.
This is so funny, Bob. It's funny you bring that up. So I've actually, I think 3 times now in my service as a state rep, I've been able to fix an issue related to licensing of a nail tech. So this is a person who basically does manicures and pedicures and had a state of Maine licensing problem. Now, I don't blame the state of Maine. Frankly, it's I believe it is a requirement that comes from the legislature, of which I am a part. But we do have a licensing requirement for nail techs, and I actually about 2 months ago I went for my first ever pedicure. I'd never been. It was great. My wife took me down there to first class nails, and we had it was cool. I see why she likes to go. But I thought, this is odd. I have to be honest. Why, this licensing requirement. So I mean, I do think on some of these things, we've got to look at what really are we putting individuals and businesses through, to license a nail tech. I was able to sort out those requirements, but it did take a few weeks, and it'd be nice if that person had just been able to get to work and not have to contact their state rep and go through that. So I think you kind of get those things one by one. You just got to work through them, and if you're somebody who is not divisive and you don't come at things with a particular policy position, and you are working with the the bureaucracy of state government, wonderful people, and doing good work, working hard, but following, the rules that they've been given. If they know that I'm just a down the middle guy who is genuinely trying to do the work every day, they respond to that. They say, hey, Marty, look, here's the lay of the land, here's the rules, here's what we can do, here's how we can help you out. And so that's been a really good approach for me. People know I don't come from one side or the other. I don't get in the papers for taking a big stance on things. I'm kind of a worker bee. I just kind of keep my head down and do the work, and that's been a good approach. I think people respond to that.
Ranked choice.
Ranked choice voting, yeah.
What are your views on that? What is your opinion?
Well, I think people are interested in electoral reforms, kind of a long way of putting it, but they're not happy with the way the power structures are working at the state level and in Washington, and they've expressed that a couple of times now in relation to this reform called ranked choice voting. Of course, I joke if I'm kind of a truck guy. I happen to drive a Ford truck, but if you had to ask me, if I couldn't get a Ford, would I get a Chevy or a Dodge? I couldn't do the Dodge, I got to tell you. But I put down the Chevy or the GMC second. So for me, I would go Ford, Chevy, Dodge, right? So that would be my ranked choice voting of trucks, and that's how I would kind of look at that thing. I like the idea that I wouldn't have to, vote against Ford just so I wouldn't get Dodge. So I think that's a reform that people have kind of been looking for in that way. I mean, you clearly see that in the voting results, and it will apply to my race for Congress. So they think it's really interesting. So you'll have me as an independent, and it's a reform that people, I think, associate with parties, and particularly the Democratic Party. But actually, I would argue that it's a reform that helps the moderates, helps the independents like me, because if you're concerned about a particular party position one way or the other in Washington, but you think, well, I don't want to vote for Marty because he would be some kind of a spoiler or something like that. You don't have to worry about that in my race. It takes away kind of the spoiler effect. To the extent that even is a valid argument, it just definitely doesn't apply in the Ford, Chevy, Dodge race. So I'm supportive. I think that it's been a good reform, and I also think, interestingly, in the gubernatorial primaries, I don't know if that was the best test case for ranked choice voting, because you had people, 7 on the Democratic side and 4 on the Republican side, that they were members of the same party, and they kind of were in the same lane, so to speak. And for my race, we have people, all good people, the right, the left, and the middle. I'm the guy in the middle, and so my race is actually getting some national attention because of this. It's unique. It's something that we only have in Maine. Maine has a proud tradition of independent politicians, all the way from the top of the ticket on down, and so it's exciting. It's exciting, I have to say.
It certainly is that. And yeah. I find the ranked choice to be very confusing.
I hear you.
And that concerns me.
Yep.
People might be wanting to do one thing, but they get confused and they end up doing something else.
Yeah.
Quite by error.
Yeah.
And that has me very concerned. You might say I'm a originalist. I believe in the original form of the Constitution. I don't see it as a living document. It is what it is. And our founding fathers were remarkably intelligent.
That is true.
When they put this whole thing together, and they created the greatest political document, the greatest form of government the world has ever seen. And I suspect that will still be the case 50, 100 years from now.
If I have anything to do with it, yes, it will.
If we get through the next 4.
Yeah.
So that's where my concern lies. I think it's because I got confused on one of the questions in the ranked choice.
I hear you. You mean the referendum question itself?
Yes.
Yeah. That was I think it was long. It was long, and it was sort of a counterintuitive wording, I think, could be argued. But I think for my race, it will be very straightforward to rank myself first, and your second choice second, and so forth. And this is where ranked choice voting can shine, I think, because it's a three-person race with three people who do very different things, and so it will be even further apart than Ford, Chevy, and Dodge. It'll be like Toyota, Honda trucks, and Ford, and I don't know, an electric vehicle or something. A forced analogy. Very forced analogy. Anyway, I hear both viewpoints, and it will apply for my race, and I hope that people will use it.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah. I'm excited. And I think the team behind it was really hard workers too, and they deserve a lot of credit for that. To get that thing on the ballot, they collected signatures through the polar vortex of last winter, and I collected a few of them myself, and it wasn't easy. It gives you an idea of how much passion there is for that electoral reform, just to know just mechanically what they did to get that thing back on the ballot.
I'll give them credit for doing that, but I cannot find myself in agreement with it. Mm-hmm. I'm too tied in with the advantages of having an electoral college.
Yeah, at the federal level, yes.
And our founding fathers did a remarkable job of designing a document to balance off the areas of the country. And otherwise, we're going to have the country being run by the West Coast and the East Coast, and the whole middle part of the country, which is the heartland of the country, will have minimal impact.
Yeah, so you wouldn't like it as a national electoral reform. Yeah, right. I see what you mean. Yeah.
And now you have to look at it nationally, because guess what? You're running for state rep.
Yes, I'm running for U.S. congressman. Yes, exactly. And just to kind of close out the topic of ranked choice voting, I would say a very interesting thing about it is that it is not being used for the state races, and that goes back to Joshua Chamberlain in 1880, and the concept of a plurality, and so the problem is with the Maine Constitution. The problem is actually not with the federal Constitution. So that's why it applies for the U.S. Senate race that Angus King will be in, and the congressional races, but it doesn't apply to any of the governors or state rep races. So it's kind of an interesting thing. It's sort of the Secretary of State, Matt Dunlap, is great at telling the story of Joshua Chamberlain and that crisis of government way back more than 140 years ago now. It's kind of interesting.
Another topic that we can touch on, because with time is running away. Person's very ill in the hospital, on the doorstep of death. How long do we continue to keep that person alive when they're nothing more than, for lack of a better term, a vegetable? They've lost all of their abilities. Where do we go? What do we do? Is there a federal role in that?
I don't know. I think it's interesting. I mean, I think you start out that kind of conversation by encouraging everybody to complete their will. I went through that locally here with the Roland Gagne and his team, and it's not an easy discussion. You sit there, you're forced to answer questions about yourself and your life and where you think things are going to go and where you're going to end up. Just answer some hard questions, but I think it's important to do that. And whether you would like personally to be resuscitated and so forth. And, you're talking about, draining down the financial resources that you hope would be available to your children and stuff like that. So any of us should go through, look, I just turned 50 and I just got that
You're a youngster.
So, I mean, but I can't say that I'm some beacon of how this should have been done as far as completing your will. I didn't do it until recently and probably should have been done some time ago, and everybody should do that. So that's a good exercise, so make sure that we all do that. That bill has come up a couple of times in the Maine legislature in my terms there, and Representative Bobby Beavers of Wells brought it forward with a lot of passion, and there's great interest on both sides of it. And I just think it's like a continuing debate that we need to have. I don't know what the right answer is. I don't know if anybody does, but I just know it's a difficult time, and I always kind of try to pride myself on just hearing from everybody as we go through that. And you want to talk about something that brings out passionate stories that are really meaningful and bring a tear to the eye. It's an issue like that. It's extremely powerful to be in that committee room or on the floor of the legislature and hear some of those stories. I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you.
We're running up against the clock. What if there's one thing that you would like to have the people remember or walk away from their TV set? What would that one thing be?
I can change the way that Washington works. I know I can't do it all by myself, but I can be part of a new wave that wants to fix and not fight down in Washington. I don't arrive at an issue with a predetermined side. I take things as they come, and I view this role in Congress for Maine differently. I have to tell you, Maine only has 2 people in Congress. There is literally a 15 or 20 block area in Chicago that has a congressman. We're not like that here. We've only got 2 people, and we need to have somebody down there that's going to work for us every single day, regardless of where we come from on a given issue. And what you hear about in the papers is bills and, procedures in Congress. Those things are great, but really I think the way the work gets done is when you come down to see me in Washington or you reach out to one of my field offices, I'm on it 24/7. I'll do whatever it is you need to be almost like customer service, the front door of government. Make Maine people and Maine businesses more successful every day. Everything I can do to put my energies behind that is what I'm going to do. And when I get back from Washington, I'm coming to your high school graduation. I'm coming to the football game. I'm coming to the Veterans Recognition Ceremony. I'm going to be touring your business. Me and my family will be walking in that parade and coming and shaking your hand. So I'm dedicated to this. I'm determined to do this just for the people of Maine, not for me. And that's what I'm all about. That's why I ran. That's why I'm so passionate about that. And hopefully that comes through.
Well, Marty, it's been a pleasure having you on as a guest again. This is the second show you've been on. And I have absolutely no objection to having you on a third or fourth time, or however many times we can.
Thank you.
You're a pleasure to have on as a guest. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure and an honor, Bob.
Good
Thank
luck.
you for all you do.
I wish you the best of good fortune, as I do all the other guests, all the other politicians. That it's interesting, and I made comment of this earlier. When I first took on this show, I said I'm going to cover everything, but I'm never going to cover politics. I think I spoke a little bit too soon.
I think you broke that rule. I know you had.
Because just a few weeks ago, I had
Sean Moody.
I had a whole bunch of people
Yeah.
in a brief span of time. I think I had instead of doing one show a week, I did 5 shows in 1 week. All political.
Of all stripes too, and I think people really respect that about you, Bob. That you taking, you don't take a side. You just listen. You've had everybody from any party with any kind of mission on. Yeah,
yep.
I think that's a great thing to do.
That's the goal.
Well, good. Well,
and sometimes it's very difficult, but I think we've been successful in it. I started off the show giving credit to the people in the production room, and I cannot minimize that at all. The support that these folks give is tremendous. With that, I'm going to close the show. I wish you the best of luck, and folks, enjoy the day. And irrespective of what day you're looking at the show, right now it's a beautiful day out there. And hopefully when you're watching the show, it'll be a beautiful day, and you'll have a great day of viewing the show and having a great day in general. Bye-bye.